Alrighty, I think we're about ready. I got, throttle linkage rigged up with a bungee cord to spring it back, and yeah, we got a heat cycle in this thing. I mean, we're ready to rip it around the yard. It's been a long day, and I'm ready for this, I tell you what. Alrighty, folks, here she is, a Jeep named Eureka. We actually got to go on our first drive. Now, for you guys, this was an instant, and we're watching this video. For me, it's been a week. So last week, I had a buddy up here, and we were goofing around. I honestly thought it was going to take more work than it did to have this thing driving around the yard. So that's why I wasn't really keeping up with the video. But yeah, I got this thing ready to drive, and we just drove it. I still haven't checked any of the gear oils or anything, so obviously we just took it around the yard, kind of slow. I mean, it doesn't have brakes, so it's not like I was going to go super fast, but took it around the yard. It's just amazing to drive this thing. This thing's so cool. So runs, it drives. I guess that was the goal of the video, but I'm going to keep going with the video here, and we're going to check up on some other stuff. Things that we need now, of course. Stopping, I need to check all the bearings, and I need to make sure everything's got lube in it and all that nonsense, and then we'll be ready to actually really drive this thing a little more. So I got some parts on the way already, and we got some stuff that already just showed up. Over here on the old messy workbench, we've got that's a master cylinder rebuild kit in there, and then we got all new rubber hoses. I've got wheel cylinder rebuild kits on the way. I just got rebuild kits for the wheel cylinders because I've got, well, so there's 3 Jeeps with axles up there, and I also have like 2 extra sets of axles kicking around, maybe 3 extra sets of axles kicking around. So in all that nonsense, I've definitely got rebuildable wheel cylinders, so we'll just dig around in the old stash, get a bunch of rebuildable parts, and of course that's a lot cheaper for me instead of buying new wheel cylinders, because of course I'm probably the cheapest human being in the world. So with all that said, I mean, we're just going to dive in. I'm going to get this thing up in the air on just some jack stands so we can get all the wheels off, and we'll pop off all the brake drums, have a look at just how bad the brakes are. I also did not buy brake shoes because, of course, like I said, I've got a bunch of parts. I should have a good set of brake shoes kicking around somewhere, and this Jeep, of course, everything I'm doing on it, super cheap. The shiniest part on it is that carburetor, and that thing was only $100. So, we're keeping this one cheap. I just want it, bare bones to drive around and have a good time with. So, yeah, we'll scrounge up parts out of the parts piles. It'll take a little more time, but, obviously in the end it'll be cheaper. So, yeah, get it up in the air, and I'm going to start ripping her apart. Alrighty. Obviously, you guys just saw me pull the fronts off, the front drums that is. And those brake shoes are in beautiful shape. And now we're on the rear. Thought I'd show off this tool yet again, just because it's a very important part of working on any of these old Jeeps like this, or even the Scout. The Scout has the same style rear axle in it, and that's actually the reason why I have this tool. This is a cheap version of this tool. This one's off of Amazon, and obviously that's a strike plate, so I guess before I take it off, you just slip this on and you can hit it with a hammer to help drive it like an impact, basically. And all it does is it pulls the drum off. This one actually wasn't on tight at all. I literally was able to just spin this tool and you can see it popped off. But we'll show you guys here. So this is a tapered axle shaft here. So it tapers down, and the drum's obviously got the opposite taper. So the drum literally slides on there, swages on, and it is held in place by that tapered seat. So if you go to pull this drum, you can whack on it with a hammer and you can bend everything. You can try using an old 3-jaw puller on the drum and you can, bend things and break things. Or you can get this tool. This thing's awesome, works better. Theoretically, you don't break anything, you don't hurt anything. It's just better in every way. But yeah, obviously this drum's off. These brake shoes are in great shape too. So I think we're gonna get away with rebuilding wheel cylinders and rebuilding the master cylinder on this thing. So that is awesome. Alrighty-o. I just got the master cylinder out. Obviously, I just blew this thing apart. It's got quite a bit of rust here in the back and around the back of it, but this little rubber boot, I think, saved the thing. It's pretty nice inside, just got some surface rust. Obviously, I was able to get all the parts out, no sweat, which is awesome, and that's great. So I'm going to go ahead, wire wheel this whole master cylinder, and then we'll hone the inside of it. I've shown honing stuff on the Scout, so I'm just going to go ahead and knock this thing out. I got the new kit, pulled it out, and had a look, and it's got all new rubber parts. It's even got the new piston, and it's got the new rubber boot for the back of this thing. Everything is right there. Awesome. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead, get this done, get this thing crammed back in the Jeep. It's a real tight fit for the master cylinder, as anybody that's worked on one of these already knows, but those of you that don't, the master cylinder is right here under the floor of the Jeep. It goes right up in there, and so it's kind of cramped because it's right below the steering box. There's the steering box, the master cylinder goes right below it, so it's a bit of a mess to get it in and out of there, but it's not too terrible. Working on the engine and whatnot, I also realized with this Jeep, they're super simple vehicles, but they're also 10 pounds of crap packed into a 5-pound bag. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things going on for a vehicle this small, so it makes sense that things are going to be a little bit tight and they're going to be a little bit hard to work on at times, and that's just something you just got to accept with this. Regardless, I love this thing. It's been going super easy breezy on this thing. I got this brake all reassembled. This wheel cylinder that was on this thing was a foobar. It had a broken bleeder on it, and then I broke the line getting it off. So I went up the driveway, found this wheel cylinder. This is actually a brand new wheel cylinder, and then I replaced this line with, of course, junk that I had up the driveway. The old storage unit Jeep is providing for this thing right now. Of course, we'll get to the M38 later on in life. But yeah, so we got all new line back here. I've just got to rebuild the wheel cylinder over there, the other 2 wheel cylinders, replace all the rubber lines. But we're cruising right along. This thing's super simple to work on. So, and as a matter of fact, like I said, I'm replacing all the rubber lines. I was debating whether or not I should replace these, and I definitely should, because they are plugged. I tried to blow air through all of them and they're all plugged. They're all junk. So it's a good thing I have new rubber lines, and it's a great thing my wheel cylinder rebuild kits are supposed to be in the mailbox this afternoon. So we are cruising right along. Alrighty. So we got, 1, 2, and then the driver's side is 3 and 4 all assembled and ready to go here. And yeah. What a fun adventure we had here with this one. So both rear wheels ended up getting the new wheel cylinders that were on that axle. You guys probably don't remember, but that axle came out of my M38. It's the one that does not roll anymore because the whole center section is just rusted to kingdom come. That thing is gone. It's done. And it's such a shame because it had all new brake lines, all new wheel cylinders, the brake shoes and everything in that axle. They're all brand new, and Somebody just didn't put oil back in the center section, and she's pretty much gone now. I guess the axle shafts, the axle housing, everything's rebuildable on that thing, but it's a big project, and well, those new wheel cylinders found a home in this here little CJ-2A here. So the rears have the new wheel cylinders out of that. I went ahead and I went through the fronts. All the rubber parts were good. I kind of want functioning brakes here this weekend, and unfortunately shipping got delayed on my wheel cylinder rebuild kits. So I just went through and looked. All the rubber was pretty decent, so I just cleaned everything up, gave the wheel cylinders a hone for the front, and we slapped her together. So the front's all together, the rear's all together. All we got to do now is bleed the brakes, and then I've still got some cleaning up to do here. Obviously the front's not completely reassembled, but I've got everything put together enough to bleed the brakes, and we'll see how horrendous it is. We'll see how many lines I didn't remember to assemble and all that fun jazz. So yeah, I'm gonna get to it and bleed the brakes here. Okie dokie, Eureka here is back on the ground, back on its own wheels. So I went ahead and finished up the brakes, got all that done. The brakes are bled. She's a double pumper or so. That's pretty solid, actually. Doesn't go all the way to the floor, which is pretty mint. And I'm gonna have to actually kind of wheel it around, drive it, and see how the brakes feel once I get there to know, adjustments and keep trying to bleed them and whatnot. But for right now, the brakes are pretty good. Obviously, everything else is thrown back together. I went through and I dispensed fluids to this thing. Yeah, surprise, surprise. The front axle, the transmission, the transfer case, and the rear axle all needed fluid. They were all super low. And certain things are redispensing fluids, which was expected. I knew that was going to happen. But the transfer case, I threw about a half a tube of John Deere cornhead grease in the transfer case. So I know that's got some lube in it still, and the cornhead grease is pretty mint. The rear axle's retaining it well enough we can rip it around the yard and see how it does for now. Gonna need to get some pinion seal and transfer case seals for this thing, which is gonna be a good time. But for the time being, I know I put fluid in, and I know that's not all the fluid that I put in, so, I can sort of gauge how badly it's leaking. But, yeah, these old flat fenders, it's, it's not if they leak, it's how bad they leak, especially those seals on the transfer case. I know from certain other things, my Scout, those transfer case seals are just a pain in the butt. So anyhow, all that aside, all we've got left really to do is hook up a fuel system to this thing, and we should be good to go. What I'm going to try and do, I was running the gas can on the roof, just gravity fed into the carb. That worked fine, but for simplicity's sake and getting the gas tank off the roof and all that, we're going to try and run this old tank in the back here. The tank in the back's actually in pretty good shape, all things considered, so I think we can squeak by with this thing. You guys can't see in there at all, really, but it's pretty clean. A little bit of scunge in the bottom. We'll throw a fuel filter in line, of course. Safety's sake, we'll not pump a bunch of junk through that brand new carb. But yeah, like I said, I'm gonna grind on the fuel system here, get this thing all good to go. I'm gonna, fingers crossed, that fuel pump's gonna work. If not, I've got an electric clicky-clack to throw in line on here to feed the carb. So yeah, pretty basic fuel system. Alrighty, we are just that close. Went ahead and got the fuel system all thrown together. That was nothing special. There was already rubber line run from that tank all the way up here. So I just needed a new section of rubber hose into the pump. My fuel filter's right down there. It's a great spot for it right next to the exhaust, so this thing might burn to the ground. Guess we'll wait and see. These things are awesome when the carburetor's right above the exhaust too, because, fire, that's always fun. But yeah, I got that all taken care of. New rubber hose from the fuel pump up to the carburetor. Again, I don't know if that fuel pump works. We're fixing to find out, though. And another thing I went ahead and did while I was at it is I wired up an ignition switch that actually worked. What I noticed in the previous video, I think I mentioned it, was that the coil just had constant power to it when the battery was hooked up. And I figured out what had happened. And that is, if I can find the doggone thing, here we go. So this is the old ignition switch, just like a frickin' Briggs & Stratton lawnmower switch is all these are, it's just, on is the only option. But this switch, what had happened, basically, they didn't have a key, so what they did is they just took the coil wire and put it on the constant side so that it always had power when the battery was hooked up. Great, workaround, But when you go to shut this thing off, you basically have to pop the hood and, you know, unhook the battery. And that's the issue that I had when I was first driving this thing around and goofing about with it, literally last week, was that the coil had constant power and I had no way to shut it off from inside. So I scrounged up out of my junk pile this old ignition switch. So we got it wired up. You can see it does things on the amps gauge. Awesome. So this thing should be, you know, powered and whatnot, which is great. So we'll move my multimeter. Of course, that's an old switch out of another piece of junk, and I had to go ahead and test and make sure that it actually did things. So we have the battery hooked up. I hooked the coil back up. All we need to now to do is put some fuel in the carburetor, and she should light off for us. Going down the vent tube there, of course, not just pumping gas down the carb. And we'll give her a few squirts down the carb for good luck. Make sure this thing's in neutral. Good thing, because it was not in neutral. Ignition on. Things are happening down there. It looks like we have fuel. She might need to warm up for a minute. I think I might wrestle with this thing for a minute, see if we can't make it more reliable. I hope it don't lose spark again. Or it's not getting fuel. It might not be getting fuel. Fill up the float bowl again. Let's see. What does she say? Alright, I'm gonna let this thing warm up. I'll clean up my tools. That crescent wrench is about to fall off the fender in like right now. Yep, I'm gonna clean up my tools before that falls and then we'll go for a rip. Alrighty, well I was tinkering with this thing. Obviously it's facing the other way now and I can get it out. And then I was trying to get it turned around and she runs out of fuel. It did it to me twice now. I think the fuel pump there isn't really long for this world, so I'm going to scrounge up the old clicky-clack electric that I had kicking around. We'll throw it on this thing and call it quits for the old mechanical fuel pump. I had my hopes up for the mechanical fuel pump, but she's just letting us down today. So another fun development is that I had the solenoid went out on me while I was letting this thing warm up. It died, and then yeah, great. Solenoid went out. Luckily, I had another one on the shelf. But the one that I had is a 12-volt solenoid, but it's you put 12 volts to the solenoid to engage it. The old one, for whatever reason, you grounded it to engage it, which I've never seen myself, so I don't have that hooked up yet. I just got a little jumper wire. You can see the jumper wire right there. I'll just hit it, and it starts the Jeep up. But anyways, all that aside, we're just gonna, you know, throw something together for the fuel system here and let her rip. Alrighty, folks. Well, I just spent a good hour now cleaning up the shop. Had to clean up all the oil stains from, that. And got most of my tools put away. So now that the shop's clean and we got that out of the way, I'm going to go wash this thing. So why don't you guys take a good look at this thing. This is the old before video, And I'm going to go wash it. We'll get all this black scunge off of here. And one thing that I can't wait to see is how this thing's going to turn into a freaking jawbreaker. How it's got all the bright colors coming through. You can see the yellow and the green and the red. It really is just like a jawbreaker, so I can't wait to see it. Hopefully, I'll be able to wash some of the junk out of the interior here. I'm not going to be able to get all of it, and there was totally like a gallon of 1540 that spilled in there before I got this thing. You could see all the oil coming out, so we'll give this thing a good wash, and we'll see how she comes out. I can't wait to see it. Well, here she is, after one quick wash. All spiffed up, all ready to go. It's, not perfect, and I could have done a better job washing it, but, for all my elbow grease, it's not too shabby. One thing that I did notice that I hadn't noticed before, I thought this was a paint job on this Jeep. See the letters there? This is an old sign. I think it's an old business sign. Now, this Jeep came out of Delta Junction, Alaska, I'm told. And, somebody scabbed an old sign in to make this bottom. And that right there, I gotta preserve this Jeep the way that it is. I can't, restore it or do anything with it. You can see there's more of the sign back there. And another letter. It's just insane. They must have just taken a huge, gas station sign or something, like a Chevron sign, and used it to build parts for this Jeep. You can see we got Bondo and some fiberglassing over the corner there. That is just absolutely fascinating that they made part of this Jeep out of an old sign. I can't believe it. This thing is awesome. Definitely needs to remain as is. I can't touch this thing. But anyhow, there she is. She lives again. She's ripping around the yard like you wouldn't believe. I mean, just listen to that. I need to get an air cleaner on that carburetor because it's just, you can hear it. It's got vacuum at least, though. That's pretty mint. It's not running quite perfect yet, but man, that is super good for what it was, what it turned into here. I talked to Eric, who gave me this Jeep, and I guess this thing hadn't run in 20 years. I was thinking closer to 10, 15 years. No, the last time this thing ran was 20 years ago, and all he ever did was kind of put it around his yard a little bit before he pulled the cylinder head off of it. So he kind of created a revival for me, which is funny, but here she is, alive and well. Tune around or tune in later. Keep checking out the channel and whatnot. I'm going to keep doing stuff with this Jeep. We got to do a pinion seal, and we got to reseal the transfer case here at some point, and we'll be ripping this thing down the road. I hope to just, wheel this thing around all over the place. I did some measuring, and it'll actually fit on the bed of my F350, which is insane to think about, that I can just throw this thing on the bed of my truck, and I can boogie it on out somewhere, and we can go wheeling with this thing. So I'm excited for that. I hope everybody else is. And yeah, thanks for following along and joining the adventure and all the struggles into getting that Go Devil to run consistently. But man, it all worked out. It's actually cooling itself. It's not overheating at all. And I was running it pretty hard around the yard here. It'll get up to operating temp and it'll stay right there, which is just perfect. We got all new brake lines and everything in there. Wheel cylinders are all rebuilt. Everything's mint. This thing stops on a dime. I can't believe it. So we got ourselves a functional Jeep, folks. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.